morning or good afternoon, depending on what coast you're joining us from. My name is Kevin Miller with Astrix, and I am pleased to be speaking with all of you today on the topic of how to automate clinical documents with generative AI. Today's session is going to be presented by our friends at that was a little joke that we were going through earlier, but we're going to go ahead and jump to the next slide here real quick. And before we introduce our speaker, I want to take a moment and tell you just a little bit about Astrix, who we are, why we're presenting today's information, and then of course we're going to introduce our speakers. So quick company snapshot on the Astrix side of the fence, a couple of kind of fun facts, if you will. The company was established in, we can go back to that, Tim, if you don't mind 1 sec. I'll run through that quickly. The company was established in 1995. When we say vendor and platform agnostic, what that means is Astrix is a professional services firm, works with a lot of different technology vendors, and we basically we don't align ourselves with any one. We deal with lots of different vendors in the space, like the ones you're going to hear from today, of course, and we try to bring a lot of different thought leaders together when we do our webinars like the one today. We operate from locations in the United States and overseas, and we have over 1,200 employees. Greater than 90% of the team members here at Astrix hold advanced science degrees, which we're quite proud of, and we operate from our headquarters in Red Bank, New Jersey. The type of companies that we help are startups to Fortune 1000. We work with life science, enterprise, chemical, CPG, government agencies. Basically, if you have an R&D department, if you have a laboratory, if you're engaged in some form of clinical research or other, then Astrix is a company that can provide different types of services for you. And Tim, we can go to the next slide, please. So the services, I mentioned, of course, we're a professional services company. So what are those services that we provide? We like to say that we cover the entire spectrum to help optimize your performance and digital transformation across an entire ecosystem. And that oftentimes begins with things like strategic innovation or enterprise architecture. These are the earlier stage type of services where we're working with companies that help them figure out what their technology stack should look like, what the infrastructure should look like to facilitate a digital transformation. Kind of some of those more strategic and higher level type of consulting engagements is what we're doing at that level. Then we get into helping companies select different solutions. We help with development and implementation of those solutions, as well as computer systems validation. So a pretty wide and deep set of services are going on here. And then application support ongoing. In certain cases, we can be the folks who are providing that service and support as a service after the fact, after everything's all done. And then we can even go as far as helping staff. We can either staff IT professionals, or we can staff scientific and laboratory professionals. So that's enough about Astrix. I do want to turn it over to our speaker. So we'll go to the next slide, Tim, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. So Tim serves as the Executive Vice President of Product, and basically the company is specializing in generative AI for content creation in regulated industries, which is, of course, one of the reasons why we're working with them. So Tim, let me turn it over to you, and then I'm going to sit back and enjoy the presentation and the demo, and I'll pop back on at the end to help with questions.
Yeah, sounds good, Kevin. Thanks for having us, and welcome to everybody in the podcast. As we talk about clinical workflows and generative AI, right? There's nothing more interesting, I think, right now in the world than talking about generative AI. It's in everybody's feeds. We're going to be really focused on a very specific model here for medical writers and scientific writers. And I just wanted to start with kind of a level set on why we're here, why we're talking about this, and why it's important. Well, if you take a look at the drug pipeline today, it's only going to expand significantly, and AI is going to be probably a big part of that. There's not enough medical writers and scientific writers in the world today, and these are special people, right? These people have advanced degrees, they have advanced skills, and so we've got a gap forming, right, or a gap here today that's only going to get worse. And so one of the things that Yseop, my company, is interested in is helping medical writers and scientific writers become a little bit more superhuman, right? So we want to give tools to medical writers and scientific writers that really help them with their day-to-day tasks, right? The other piece of market information that I think is interesting is we've done some primary research, And it's pretty clear if you talk to senior managers in many pharma companies today, a large portion of these managers already understand that AI is going to be an impact, right? And it's going to have an impact not across the organization. And if you think about more and more drugs coming to market, you need to also think about all the processes downstream and how they're going to be impacted. And so this is one of the things that is really important for the management teams to consider. And also change management is a big part of this as well, which we may talk a bit about later. So where do we start when we talk about Gen AI? Well, the papers that came out about generative AI models came out 5-6 years ago, right? So this has been percolating for some time, but I don't think the world really got kickstarted until ChatGPT from OpenAI hit the scene and maybe 100 million people tried it out. So everybody started getting the idea that this could be pretty powerful technology. We've been working with this technology for some years, and we do find now for specific use cases, it's super interesting and can be used. Even though the hype's still really, really big, there are use cases today that could be supported with generative AI. So that's really encouraging to me and something that we'll dig into for clinical documents. When I take a look at the opportunities today, a few pop up and come to mind. There's many, many opportunities for AI, but for folks involved in clinical, article research is a pretty interesting category here, searching papers and documents, a protocol development itself for a clinical study. We're going to talk about content generation today, and there's lots of work streams here. It's not just clinical, but there's preclinical, there's CMC, there's labeling and others. So there's lots of opportunity to automate here. And then finally, the idea of prompting and querying your clinical data. Maybe health authorities have some questions and you want to get back to them very quickly. So there's some great opportunities to help medical writers. Let's dig in to the clinical area. So when you're using generative AI, there's lots of things that you have to be careful about. One thing that I like to say is that generative AI is a great technology, but it's not necessarily the product that meets the user needs, right? User personas are very specific. They need specific capabilities in an enterprise environment to be able to enhance what they do. And so just having a chat box isn't necessarily that answer on ChatGPT. So what's important to consider? Well, in regulated industries like pharma, data security is of utmost concern, right? And then how are generative AI models being trained? Is it being done with confidential documents? This could be a concern, so something to really care about. There's also the idea that generative AI is a probabilistic type of model. So you may not get exactly the results that you want, right? You don't have full control. But what's really important at the end of the day is generative AI giving you high quality results? And if we can get to that point, then it can be really useful. If these results are not high quality, right, it doesn't really help as much as I think medical writers would like it to. Another area of importance is traceability, transparency, right? Auditability. This comes up a lot. And in life sciences, many folks care about, GXP compliant solutions. And we believe that when you use generative AI in any kind of application, it's important to consider these things and actually have some ways to show medical writers how you got to the solution, the narrative, the section that you created. And I'll show you a bit more there in a moment. And lastly, everything can't be handed off to a magical model yet, right? So, medical writers are, in generative AI terms, they're humans in the loop. So even if you automate sections, medical writers still need to be involved, assess, validate, and even have some control, right? And this is important also to build into any application or model that's used in the space. Now, the way that we do it as a company is we train our models on synthetic data, right? So the idea of prompt injection or breaking models to get information out is not going to be a problem for our customers. And we have a fully secure private environment, so your data is going to be safe, any clinical data that's used. Now, also, when you talk about generative AI, lots of people get excited, but at the same time, they don't necessarily think through all of the costs associated with it and whether or not it's the right technology to use for a specific use case, right? So I would say it's really important not only to consider this technology, but other technologies to create tools for medical writers. And in our case, we use what we call a hybrid approach, which is we use symbolic AI, which is rules-based, with generative AI to really give medical writers the solutions that they need. I mentioned GXP compliance. This is key, and so built into the application, there needs to be checks and balances there. And then finally, once again, we allow in the UI some control, and we'll show you that in the demo here in a few minutes. So let's dig a layer deeper and talk about some of the documents that need to be considered when you're looking at a clinical workflow. So many of you are probably quite familiar with the common technical document. This is information that needs to go to the health authorities to get a drug to market. And some of the things that are important to look at in terms of documents are clinical study reports and the associated patient narratives in Module 5. And then in Module 2, the summary of pharmacology, efficacy, safety, clinical overview. These are some of the important documents as well. Now, this is the right side of this triangle. You can see there's other portions of this triangle. I just wanted to note here, we're talking about clinical, but all these other areas can also be automated using generative AI at some level. And we're seeing lots of opportunities there as well. So let's dig a little bit deeper in terms of how the workflow works for clinical documents. Well, if you start out with a clinical protocol and a statistical analysis plan, there's lots of documents downstream from that could actually leverage these motherhood documents, investigators' brochures, clinical study reports, the narratives, all the summaries and the clinical overview, right? And so how do we use generative AI in this case? Well, I mentioned it's important to have high quality. So in this case, we create high quality first drafts that are automated, and you can use content, say from a protocol document, reuse that in sections of other documents. And if you're in this space, content reuse has been a topic for a number of years now. But if you take a look at reuse a little bit more specifically and consider generative AI technology, GenAI is really good at transforming text from one document for reuse in another. And so let's think about it in a couple of ways. One, you may want to summarize information from a protocol before it gets into a clinical study report. You may want to change the tense of that information. You may want to apply some lean medical writing techniques. These are all things that generative AI models can do really, really well if they're trained appropriately. And so we see a great opportunity here to address content reuse and do it at a very high level so that we can really help medical writers. And I just have a couple boxes at the bottom of the slide, but it shows that if you start with something in a protocol, you can easily use GenAI and get to another section that's required for a CSR by just doing some simple summarization, for example. And this applies again and again across all of the documents downstream. So we consider this to be a pretty interesting use case. Now, it's not the only one, and we're going to talk about symbolic in a minute, but let me just talk a little bit more about generative AI technology and how you might implement this. So if you think about these large language models, you can just prompt them and you can see what you get, right? That's what everybody does today when they use ChatGPT. Well, that's pretty good for some topics, but if you want something that's a little bit more representative in regulated industries about what you're working on, specifically in a clinical space, you may want to use other techniques that help you home in on the right text or narratives that you're looking for. And that requires a little bit more refinement and understanding about how the models work and how you might use examples. Some people call them few shot prompts. There's other methodologies that people use, but I would start with prompting first. If that doesn't help with the results, then you go to what I consider to be retrieval augmented generation. And this is something that can be quite useful by using previous documents that you've used in your workflows to guide the generative AI models and help them deliver more high quality results and not hallucinate, which I think a lot of people are concerned about today. Hallucinations come up a lot, but really it's about controlling the output of the models using kind of good software techniques. And then lastly, you may fine tune these models, right? So, and fine tuning takes a little bit more effort, it takes more data, but this is also an interesting way in engaging with these models. Now, I'll tell you that we use all three approaches, right? You don't want to spend too much time training a model if it's not required, but at the same time, you need to kind of balance what you're getting for an output and validate using metrics whether or not it's going to be good enough for the user persona, in this case, the medical writer, right? So just a little bit of background there, but very interesting stuff if you're interested in engaging with large language models directly. Now let's step back from GenAI for a moment. Symbolic AI has been around for a long time, and symbolic AI is rules-based AI, and this can be very, very useful in these workflows, mainly because it's deterministic, right? Generative AI is probabilistic, but symbolic AI can be deterministic. And what that means is if you have a bunch of clinical data and you want to get narratives from that data or insights from that data, you can count on symbolic to give you 100% accuracy here. And so it might come to mind that if you take a look at a CSR, for example, there's results sections. So you could deliver 100% accurate results in the results sections, and maybe in other sections of the document, say methodologies and other areas that could use content reuse, generative AI could be really powerful. So once again, the idea here is to use the right technology for the right part in a document or section in a document and kind of optimize, use the right tools for the right application, if you will. And we've had some pretty nice results using both approaches together. Sometimes they can play off each other as well, but the idea is to get to coverage in many of these documents, greater than 80% using these methodologies in terms of a first draft. So that should be pretty exciting for many people in terms of the automation level for these documents. So I talked through this a little bit, right? But I said, a hybrid technique is pretty interesting for both content reuse and data analysis. You bring these two technologies together and they have different strengths and weaknesses. And so the bottom line here, though, is that the most important thing in the application or in the tool that you give to a scientific or medical writer is that they can trust what you're giving them. And so what does that really mean? Well, they need to understand how you're getting to the final narratives or the resultant sections in the document. And this is where great UI, UX design can come into play. This is where evidence can be used, like how did you come up with this? Show me some of this information as to how you get to the final result. This is really important and can be done when generative AI and symbolic methods are built into an application that really service the medical writer and solve some of these problems to help deliver the trust that they need. And so if you take a look at an application and what the workflow might be for these types of documents, well, clearly you need to upload some data initially. So whether it's structured data or unstructured data, it can all be uploaded into the system, into our application. And then There's what we call a report model, and this kind of models the document in its entirety, section by section. It can be pre-configured, and so medical writers or scientific writers may make a few tweaks initially, or they just may take the results first and review them and then make some tweaks afterwards, right? And then text generation is the most important thing. Can I create the report that I need? And how do I do that? Well, that can be done in Word, for example. We have a Word add-in, which we'll show you today. It can also be done by connecting with other systems like content management systems. And then once the documents have been created, obviously there's a QC loop that needs to be done. And obviously there's folks reviewing these documents, and that also can be managed by evidence and comparing section by section of the results that you're getting. And so if you take a look at this workflow, if this workflow is done right, you can save a significant amount of time in creating any one of the documents or all of the documents in the clinical workflow. So now I'm going to hand off to Cami, and she's going to show you a little bit about our Word add-in and how the document gets represented and how we can tweak it, and then maybe a little bit of information on how generative AI and symbolic AI can be used to create sections in these documents. So Cami doing the handoff now.
Perfect, thank you. Let me share my screen. Let me know when you see it. So what you should see now is an empty Word document. So if I'm a medical writer and I need to create the first draft or a clinical study report for an
hey, it's Kev here. It's not showing up on my screen just yet. Just want to make sure you're hitting share. There we go. It's there. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So you do see an empty Word document here that will be in a few minutes my first draft of a clinical study report with the help of Yseop Copilot. So you can see that on the right panel, sorry, you have the little preview here. So that is what Yseop Copilot has generated using both pre-existing documents such as the protocol and my table, my analysis. So when I press insert, instead of spending a week to create that first draft, I have here my document that is magically populated with that template. So we have here all the elements I need for my phase 3 study, clinical study report. So I'll leave just a minute for the document to be fully populated and I'll go over it. So as a medical writer, in order to use Yseop Copilot, I do not need to have any background in generative AI. I don't need to be a prompt engineer. I don't need to have any knowledge on technical background of configuring. It has been done already, and it overs smoothly to me through that Copilot here. So instead of spending a week to have that first draft, I have it here, as you can see, in a few seconds. So what happened? It pre-populated my document with my section. Here I'm using a template, which is one of the standard of the industry that could be fully configured, but here we're using Translate. And I can see that I have some section, for instance, here my background has been pre-populated using generative AI. So what has happened here is we have used a protocol that was existing, that was really detailed and in future tense, and it has been transformed. The right transformation have been applied. So it's been reused, and I have now my background in past tense and summarized and put in the right section here. Again, I don't have to do any work. I don't have to be a prompt engineer. It has been pre-configured here. So I can start my work and review the document. And if I want to focus on a specific section, I can do that too. I have access here in the little Copilot to all my different sections. And let's say I want to rework on the safety summary. The safety summary is a section that is using data and not text. Here I'm using some table, some statistical table that will give me an overview of my adverse events, comparing to different groups together. So here I also have some text that is pre-populated. I have my interpretation of data that has been done by the tool using symbolic AI here. So I'm sure that everything is fully accurate using the last data that has been inserted. And I can work on my configuration if I want to fine-tune it. As a medical writer, I can directly do it. Let's review it. So I have my comparison of my groups, and I also have my adverse events. I do have a lot of detail here. So if I want to switch and change my level of detail, that's something I can do directly here, directly in Word. So I can change my configuration live. So I have here access to some text customization. So I won't go through the option I have. Let's say I just want to narrow down my level of detail for my adverse events. And I would like to have a threshold and only show my adverse events above a limit of 6.5%. That would make more sense for my study. So by doing that, I'm saying that I want only the adverse event above that threshold. And by hitting refresh, in just a second, I have my texts updated, still using my data that I can see here on my table, taking into account that new threshold just here. So it's really easy to use. I don't have to switch tool. I can do everything I need to directly in Word, and it's really empowering me to get to my first draft in a few hours instead of spending a week here to get to my documents. And that's it for my demo. I'll hand it over to you again.
Okay, thanks, Cami. Okay, so just once again, so Cami just showed you in a Word add-in that we can essentially manage everything that you need to do to create a document. Of course, there's lots of things going on in the background. The technology is managed by our platform. We're just trying to make sure that it's as easy as possible for a medical writer to get their job done quickly. On the screen now, I have a use case that I think is interesting, right? So patient narratives are part of CSR. There's lots of patient narratives created depending on the phase of the trial. But I think this is a pretty interesting use case in that we know already from working with a variety of customers that we can save lots of time in terms of getting the CSR completed, certainly greater than 4 weeks now, and that's only going to get better. And so that, of course, can help us get drugs to market faster, save lives. Companies can create revenue more quickly as well. But I think what's really interesting is a real use case, right? And so this is just one, patient narratives are just one portion of the CSR. But we've been working with Lilly over the last 1.5 years, and they're finding that they can do more, right? So they can manage these narratives very quickly. We have essentially 100% coverage and automation here. We can create as many narratives as you want in just a few seconds. We're also helping, the quality team take less time having to spend on these documents. So I actually have some real numbers for you as an example. So here's some of the results, right? So 2,300 narratives completed with our tools for medical writers. The medical review time's been cut in half. In this case, they're outsourcing a lot of these docs, so now they don't have to do that anymore because it's more automated. Just a couple of seconds to get to first drafts on as many patient narratives as you're interested in creating. They saved significant time in QC as well. And so we already know for this very, very narrow use case within this clinical document automation possibility or opportunity, I mean, this is 10,000 hours already. So once again, this is a really small part of the overall clinical process, but already meaningful. And as we go from document to document, as I mentioned earlier, there's CSRs, there's summaries, there's overviews, all these things can be automated in the ways that we talked about earlier. And then the savings just becomes massive, not only in more productivity, but then also time to market. So we're excited to share this with you today. Hopefully you got a lot out of this presentation, and glad to answer any questions that you have. Kevin, if you want to step in now.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for a great presentation and demo. Always love to get a peek at the products when we have a chance to do so. So folks, if you weren't on right in the beginning, I want to make sure that you have a chance to ask some questions of Yseop or of Astrix. There's also ways to get in touch with the folks at Yseop through the website. You can reach out to Tim directly, T. Martin, and then there's a marketing ad email there as well. Question-wise, I know I've got a few on the floor, but again, for the folks that are on, if you weren't on right when we were starting, I mentioned that you can ask a question by just typing it in on the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll read the question out loud. We won't read your name, we won't read your company. We typically just read the question out loud. And so I want to put that out there for you. If you have something on the tip of your tongue you want to ask it, go ahead and key it in, and we'll get to it. So a few that were on the floor right at the beginning here. Let me look at these real quick. And bear with me. All right. And I'll just read the question out, Tim. You guys can kind of figure out how you want to handle the answering. All right, let me see here. Type of companies that you work with, do you typically only work with large pharmaceutical companies?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, there's lots of opportunity in large pharmaceutical companies, right? They're handling lots and lots of these documents and processes. But no, we can also, provide support to kind of mid-tier companies that require these same services, right? So today, there's a lot of clinical activity, a lot of use cases that we're working on. But as I mentioned earlier, I mean, there's great opportunity for preclinical and CMC labeling and other things moving forward. So we see the opportunity across all segments in pharma.
Great, appreciate that. And thank you for asking that question. Let me see what else we got here. All right, this one was about implementation. Can you give us a sense of what the typical implementation looks like if things are fairly standard?
I can, talk a little bit about kind of the initial trial, and then I don't know if Vanessa on our team's, she's our customer success person, so she might be able to add a little bit of flavor. But we're interested in doing trials in just a few days, right? So the most complex thing is, what does the data look like from any company? In pharma, the data is usually a little bit different from company to company, and so that's something that we like to work on very quickly for a trial. But then once we get past that point, we can scale very quickly from document to document once the customer is interested in moving forward. Vanessa, can you add some flavor to that?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, it takes really a couple of days to set up the first instance of the solution, and then a few weeks to fully deploy a first automation pack, which can be on top of which we can add other automation packs like other documents. So usually it's about really between 4 and 12 weeks to fully deploy our platform and get first results.
Great, appreciate that.